So it's not really something that I think about very much, but Victoria is very much a city of politics. Even the place we just went for coffee, Rudy, you were saying that's a place where people go to do business.
Rudy and Habit on Pandora is where a lot of local politics happens, yeah.
Right here around City Hall.
That's right.
Now, the reason I brought both of you gentlemen is because between the two of you, you represent either actually working in various branches of government or expertise in various branches of government. So something I didn't know about you when we came here last month to film the punk episode is that you don't only work as a city councilman, Matt, you're also working in the provincial government.
That's right. So I work at City Hall right here as a city councillor, elected official, which is a part-time job, but I also work for the province in a ministry, and I've worked for a number of ministries around the province. So I have a pretty good lens of local and provincial and how those work together.
Yeah.
And I have no idea how they work with the federal level. So that's why we have him.
That's why we have Will, who has been working in federal politics for your entire career.
Well, studying it for my entire career, working in it for the last 3 months. So it's been a bit of a change.
Yeah, so that's actually really funny because the first time I saw your name, you were actually a professor of poli-sci at University of Victoria. And that's kind of what you've been doing until suddenly you started doing something very related but different.
That's right. Yeah, similar themes, but definitely a different perspective and definitely a different experience being on the inside than being on the outside looking in.
So you're working in federal, and this is going to be quite new and exciting. Like, oh my God, I'm working in federal. I have no idea how this works practically. But from an abstract sense, because of your experience in poli-sci, you would also essentially know a little bit more than your average Canadian on all of the branches of government.
I think that's fair to say. When you teach this stuff for a living, you probably know a little bit more than most people do.
Yeah. And what was your specific focus at UVic, if I may just ask?
Yeah, of course. So for around 15 years, I've been an international relations and global security expert. So my interests are Canada, but really Canada's place in the world and how it is that we are dealing with major global challenges related to climate change, related to changing balance of power internationally, and changing relationships with different parts of the world.
Excellent. And for you, I mean, as a former punk rocker, we already know this, kind of what has been your focus, generally speaking, or why you work in politics?
Yeah, I ran for local politics because I'm interested in kind of what happens on the ground. How is this plaza designed and how could it be best designed to bring people here? How is that park designed? How are the bike lanes? I really like that, your daily interaction of what happens when you walk out the door in the morning. And a lot of it is influenced, of course, by big, federal things like, how's our military doing, but also at the local level, that's what I personally like. And that's actually how I know Will is from way back in the day, is we were both kind of in the urbanist community where Will, I think, also shares a lot of values around urbanism, like how a city is laid out. And I'd be curious to hear some of his takes on if that's even a thing you get to do at the local level, or if you've completely given up on the bike lane and walkable city advocacy for things like what's Russia doing?
Yeah, no, I love that question, Matt. No, I think I'm motivated to be involved in politics because I want to see a federal government that supports that kind of local urbanism as well, right? I think that's really important to try to have as much alignment as we can between making the really kind of local policy changes that we know are necessary so that people can live better and live more locally and live more sustainably and live more healthily, and that's really hard to do if you've got a federal government or even a provincial government that's trying to go in the opposite direction. So one of my motivations is to try to ensure that we've got a federal government that sees the value in that kind of investment at the local level and to try to help make it happen.
And a good example is the new bike lanes on 4th Street, which the federal government paid 75 cents of every dollar to build those bike lanes. So the feds came in with the big money to go, if you build bike lanes, we'll pay for a lot of it. And the local government said, yeah, we like and we want bike lanes, we'll design them and we'll take the check. And often the provinces in the the middle there kind of administering that. So it's a good example of how all three governments are aligned on this issue and required to get something done.
And I'm just going to also add, you know, without bike lanes, this show wouldn't exist. Or the job that I do when I'm not doing the show, because this is one of the more bike-friendly cities in Canada, I think, honestly. And that enables us to go around in an oversized tricycle with lovely gentlemen like you and, you know, explore our own city.
Are we getting on?
I think we are.
All right, let's do it. All right.
So we're going to start with a tour of a place that was actually quite important for you. The place kind of where you started your your provincial career.
That's right.
But I wanted to ask you very quickly, just sort of about like, how does one go from like just talking about politics to actually deciding to run for politics? Like, how does that happen?
Oh, great question. In my case, it happened because there were a lot of issues going on that I had strong feelings about. And if you have strong enough feelings about it and it doesn't feel like that's the direction that things are going, you've got a choice. You can not do much more and feel bad about things, or you can put up your hand and say, hey, this is my idea. If other people agree with it, maybe cast your vote for me. And that's how it kind of worked out in my case.
Really? Was there a moment where you're like, am I going to do this?
Oh yeah, several moments.
Where you're like, I decided to run, and I was like, this is a terrible idea. I'm definitely not doing this. I had a couple sleepless nights. And it's easier for me because there's 8 seats available. You were like, this is a pretty big risk here.
It was definitely a risk. It's definitely a risk. A lot of comfort and privilege from the fact that with my job, I was able to take a leave and run and still have my job kept for me.
Well, the other thing I think is just like, if you would have had a failed run, that still would have been interesting for your job.
Absolutely.
That would have still been information you could bring.
Absolutely.
So it wouldn't be a total failure no matter what.
And in the same vein, I can serve for however long or however short a time in Parliament, and it's still all kind of valuable insights and information for my academic life if and when I return to it. So, but in my case, you have to remember that I chose to run in the fall of 2024 as the Liberal candidate in Victoria.
So Carney wasn't announced. There's no Carney effect at that point.
Carney wasn't on the scene yet.
It was still Trudeau.
Trudeau wasn't going anywhere. The Liberal Party was at 16% nationally.
So you didn't even think you were necessarily in it to win it, per se.
We were in it to fight a good fight. That's what we were doing. But the expectations of victory were very low at the time that I put up my hand.
It was just like, even everyone assumed, like, Pierre Poilievre, Prime Minister, will come back in 4 years.
Absolutely. Things started to turn around somewhat after the US election, when people in Canada realized that we were going to be dealing with Donald Trump again. And then they changed a little bit more after Justin Trudeau announced his resignation. And then they really changed after Mark Carney got in the race for Liberal leader.
Right.
And then in the first week of March, our odds flipped completely and they never went back.
Yeah, wow, that's an incredible story.
So there was a moment where you were like, oh my God, this thing I was kind of doing, not for fun, but like with like no expectation that this is going to completely transform your life. This is going to completely transform my life.
Yep.
How did that feel?
I mean, it's an interesting reality to kind of come to terms with, right? The consequences of my own actions.
Yes.
You know? Somewhere in a drawer, we have a 2-election strategy document, we just had a different plan. And that was the plan that my family signed off on. And that my family set a bunch of expectations around. So it just goes to show you really can't control how these things are going to work out. And I think it's a good lesson to proceed a little cautiously.
Yeah.
Only put up your hand if you're really prepared to run and to do the thing.
Yeah. I love how in politics there's these incredible swings that you can never predict. Some people get these swings in their favor, and some people have, like, everything's going well, and then one event can just absolutely tank someone. And it's exciting just to watch how the public sentiment shifts. And that's something I'm aware of, is like really tapped into what are the public feeling, and what do they want to see and what do they not want to see.
And what are we seeing in front of us right now?
All right, this is my old work.
This is your old work. Okay, so we are actually looking at, before you ever ran for elected office, you were still working somehow politics adjacent.
Yes, this is the BC Ministry of Finance, and so I was a civil servant here for almost 10 years. Oh, there's my buddy right there.
There's your buddy?
Yeah.
Still a former colleague?
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, so I got to learn about how the province collects money, how our taxation system works, and I was involved in writing tax legislation. So I learned a lot that I did not know about from that, and I think I bring some of that to the provincial level. And I think also one of the things I've realized in politics, and maybe you as well, like so much of it is about money. Where does the money come from? And how do you divide that up amongst things that you need to spend money on? How do you balance the need for a bike lane here versus the need for more NATO funding? Those are really challenging conversations, and we have that at the local level. Is everything is about funding. So
you started with finance, which is maybe in a way was a really great start for before you deal with some of that funding yourself. You were dealing with it from an office standpoint.
that's right, yeah. And I've found a really big passion in the city budget. That's just something I didn't really think I would be into, but that's kind of where I spend most of my time. It's going line through our budget and seeing what's possible. How can you do the most with the least amount of money?
Yeah.
And how much can people afford to pay? And it's a challenge. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you got into that kind of budget level? Or is that above your level pay grade so far?
Yeah, great question. Mostly above my pay grade.
So
In
far,
my
yeah.
current role, I don't have a direct hand in setting the federal budget in that sense. But we hear a lot from constituents
Yeah.
and folks in the riding about what they think we should be spending money on and what they don't want us to be spending money on.
Right.
So there's a lot of time spent discussing federal government budget priorities, and in some cases defending them against folks who think that money could be better spent on other things,
Yeah.
or they would rather us not spend the money at all.
Yeah. Well, people want stuff, but then they don't want to pay for it.
Yeah.
So it's a hard thing to communicate.
Tale as old as time.
In the course of my job, I take people around to some of the most scenic and memorable places here in Victoria. And I thought we would start in this beautiful parking lot with this wonderful pile of French fries that may have once belonged to a delicious poutine. Matt, you are responsible for us being in this parking lot. Would you care to justify your actions?
Sure. So right behind us is actually one of the most innovative housing developments in the city once it's built. So behind us is going to be a 4-building project where we're going to have 1 building of supportive housing for people who need on-site supports, 1 building of rent geared to income, so people who pay rent of 30% of their income, 1 building of rental, and 1 building of condo, all based around a grocery store, daycare. So it's a really innovative development that's going to make sure there's housing space for everybody. And a lot of what we do at the local level, and I suspect Will, is the housing affordability crisis. And this one is interesting because the local government approves the project and works with the developer, but a lot of the money to build affordable housing actually comes from the federal government, who show up and go, here's $200 million or a mortgage to borrow that. So I suspect you're getting a lot of asks about what are you doing for affordable housing and how much are you putting into that?
Absolutely. This was one of the biggest, pillars of the whole campaign, unquestionably, right across the country, was affordable housing and what's the federal government going to do to support it. So this is something that we know people right across Canada have an expectation of governments working together. And while the federal government can't do it all on its own, what the feds have is resources. And so the federal government is in a position to provide funding support to local governments and other kind of providers to actually build the housing themselves and to get it done sooner than they would otherwise be able to if they had to get the resources in other ways.
Yeah, it was one of the big reasons. I think one of the things the Justin Trudeau government did quite well is they put a lot of money in the pot for affordable housing projects. If you go around the city, I could point out probably 30 projects that received federal funding. And if that was going to be cut, it was going to have a major negative impact for affordable housing projects.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this project right here, though, like the lot that we're not really looking at, facing away from, I'm looking at, there's not really much there right now. How did this become a project you were working with? Was that your connection to provincial government or municipal government?
No, this was municipal. So there's a developer. They worked with the feds and the province and BC Housing and the different lots, and they said, here's a proposal where we get some money from the feds, we get money from the province and BC Housing, and then they have to come to the local government to approve it. So I got to vote on, do we want this to go forward or not? But it was a developer working with different partners. And I think it just shows the required level of collaboration, that you need all 3 governments working together on things like affordable housing. Otherwise, it simply won't happen.
Right. So you got like federal, you've got provincial, you've got municipal, but also, I don't know if we would call it a branch of government, but there is consultation with First Nations people who have been stewards of this land since time immemorial.
Yeah, absolutely. First Nations is becoming a consultation, cooperation, a co-development is becoming a bigger and bigger. And right down the road, we have a massive site that used to be an electric power plant, a contaminated site that is now transferred over to the 2 local nations, Songhees and Kosapsum, and it's going to be a big First Nations project down the road. And there's quite a few sites around the city that are owned by First Nations, and they're going to be a big part of the city's future. Okay. As they should be.
But the federal government does have a constitutional obligation to consult with Indigenous peoples when developments or other kinds of projects are happening on lands that would affect their constitutional and treaty rights. So it's something that the federal government always has to bear in mind whenever we do anything, is how is the policy or the project that we're involved in going to affect Indigenous peoples, and therefore what are the kinds of obligations that we have to engage with those peoples before a decision is made and then throughout the process.
Now, I get the municipal, obviously. It makes a lot of sense. Federal, I also get because you're getting federal funding. Is it also just a question of also getting provincial funding, or what's the role of provincial?
A lot of times the federal government, let's say for housing, will give the province a check. Like essentially, here's $500 million for housing. Good luck. The province then through BC Housing goes, okay, we're going to administer it through these 50 projects. And then the local government goes, okay, well, we'll approve that one. And can you change that one? And that one needs more parking. And so that's kind of how, very, very loosely, how things are structured between
parking minimums, yeah.
And then the Crown is even involved because the Crown is on the money. So all of the branches of government.
Yeah.
And the Crown's involved for both the province and the Fed. So there's a provincial Crown and a federal Crown.
That's
so the
right.
Crown is like this amorphous thing that covers both provincial and federal orders of government.
What role does the Crown actually have? Provincially, federally, you know?
So I'd be curious to hear if you have a different answer to this, Matt. But in that sense, I think the Crown is multiple things, and we sometimes get confused about that. So the Crown is more than just the monarchy and just the figure of the sovereign, now King Charles III. The Crown is a synonym for the Canadian state and for the power of constitutional government in Canada at the provincial and federal levels. So the Crown is on the one hand a synonym for the government, the symbolic holder of the office of, the sovereign themselves. And in some ways, the Crown is also this slightly amorphous thing in our Constitution, in all of our laws. It's the source of political authority. So it's kind of the same way that the US Constitution, for example, talks about we the people and power flows up from the people. In our system of government, actually, what we have is the Crown and power flows down from the Crown.
That's exactly correct. At the local level, what's interesting is municipalities are created legally by the province. So the Crown doesn't create municipalities at all. They give the federal government the structure to create the provinces, and then the provinces have a local government act that creates municipalities that says what we can and can't do. So a lot of times things at the local level we can't even do because the province hasn't allowed us to do, which probably for good reason in some situations, because municipalities can get out of control sometimes.
Yeah. Well, creatures of the province, like they say.
Creatures of the province is a term that is always used, which, yeah, that's true.
It's not the nicest characterization.
No,
you
it's
guys
a bit
aren't
weird.
Creatures in that way, but
Creatures,
that's...
right? Yeah, it's a bit odd.
Yeah. So here we are. I don't know where you thought I might be taking you, but this is the place. You've had some campaign events.
We have, yeah. They've been great to us. We had a tour here during the campaign and had a few samples afterwards, and then we had a volunteer appreciation event here after the campaign was done. So, the Phillips Brewery folks have been great to us. Really appreciate their support.
But is this a place that before you thought of getting into politics, you went to anyway as a civilian, let's call you?
I have been here once or twice in an unofficial capacity and enjoyed the quality of the service. Yeah, for sure. So to have a really dynamic local business like this that employs people, but that also produces this kind of great environment for socialization and contributes to the urban fabric, that also creates a great product that then gets exported elsewhere and becomes part of the branding for Victoria and Southern Vancouver Island. There's huge benefits of having businesses like Phillips, and so it's part of our job, I think, as elected officials to help support them.
There's a little bit of ego in being any sort of public figure. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering, for you, the experience of being in a place like this and being that guy, especially since this is also still got the new car sheen for you, so to speak. What was that like?
There's definitely an adjustment to being a public figure and having that transition where sometimes people are starting to recognize you in public, and even if they don't say something, you see a lot of double takes. You see a lot of the heads that go whipping back when they kind of clock you or recognize you from the campaign material or whatever else. I think it's fair to say though that a lot of people don't know me and don't particularly care, and that's kind of nice in its own way too. It's not like everybody wants to strike up a conversation about politics. And we're still pretty close to the election, and so a lot of people are still feeling good about their vote and good about the outcome of the election.
They're not feeling disillusioned with you yet.
Not yet.
It's
They-
coming.
Not
It's
yet.
coming.
Yeah.
They don't
No,
feel like
not
you've
for me.
betrayed their campaign
I don't know what you're
promises
talking
yet.
about, Matt.
I'm 3 years in. Everyone's mad already.
So we've got 3 municipalities covered in the riding, right? This is one of the interesting things about Victoria. People hear the name of the riding and they just think it must be City of Victoria. Right. We've got City of Victoria, but we've also got the whole district of Oak Bay.
What is the riding called?
The riding is Victoria.
Oh, it's just Victoria.
Yep, and it's unusually short and simple. A lot of the
Yeah.
federal riding names have these multi-barreled,
Yeah,
long names. It's really nice to have the simplicity of being the member for Victoria. But people then think it just means the City of Victoria. It's also District of Oak Bay, and it's also 2 parts of Saanich. So the municipalities are just totally different entities than the federal riding, and so the boundaries may or may not really overlap. In a lot of cases, most cases probably, outside of big urban centers, you've got multiple municipalities contained within a single riding. I've got 3 in my riding of Victoria, but my colleague next door, Stephanie McLean from Esquimalt Saanich Souk, she's got something like 9 municipalities covered in her riding. So,
Wow.
some of the small towns, smaller, communities, and they add up because each riding has a population of roughly 100,000. So a lot of small towns can fit in that.
Do you handle stuff with Esquimalt, for example? You're not dealing with Esquimalt, but do you end up doing stuff that kind of puts you in touch with these other municipalities?
To a certain extent, absolutely, right? I mean, we're in a region down here on southern Vancouver Island that doesn't abide by the boundaries of the federal ridings, the same way it doesn't, abide by the boundaries of the municipalities. I don't think one person in 100 would be able to tell you what the riding boundary is between the riding of Victoria that I represent and Saanich Gulf Islands to the north or Esquimalt Saanich Souk to the west.
Right.
The riding boundaries are pretty arbitrary. So there is a need, I think, for us to think regionally. And even though my primary responsibility is to represent my specific constituents, there's a lot of, changes or investments that might be happening in Esquimalt or on the West Shore that matter for us here in Victoria and that matter for our constituents here. And so we want to help support good decisions.
Transit's a good example where
Transit's
we
a
need
huge
people
example.
working in the City of Victoria, but a lot of them live in Langford, and we
Absolutely.
need them on rapid transit. The federal government's paying for electric buses, maybe eventually light rail. That's stuff the local government supports, but just simply can't fund off of property taxes alone.
Absolutely.
So you guys are key partners on that.
Yeah, and that's part of the job. So advocating for the region is part of how I view our role, especially given that we've got 2 members on the southern tip of the island here who are both on the Liberal side of the House. And so we have better access to the federal government where the decisions are made about funding.
Obviously, you're elected to represent certain ridings in certain areas. Is there also kind of this aspect of oh, well, you're just saying this because that's your riding because you care about the votes? And, does it get a little bit competitive in that way?
I think it's one of the biggest challenges that I've found is that you need to be collaborative to get anything done, municipal, provincial, federal. But at the same time, you also need to advocate for yourself, stand up for yourself, and be the squeaky wheel. Yeah. And finding a balance between being collaborative and grinding on another level of government or another person is a really hard thing to do. So you want to work with your colleagues, but you're also and we get that at the local level where some people want that park and some people want that park and some people would rather have police officers in a park or whatnot. And I've found that advocating for arts and culture it's actually often the lowest priority. It's been challenging trying to stand up for things while being collaborative.
Yeah, absolutely. And now scale that up to the country as a whole, right? So we've got Liberal members of Parliament on the government benches from right across the country, from every province, from 2 of the 3 territories. So think of the difference in interests that they're all representing on behalf of their constituents, and now trying to make some sense of that in terms of government priorities. It's challenging.
Well, I was going to say a challenge for you in a way is that we often had a backbencher opposition member here. So say, well, we can't really get that much because our MP is in opposition. And so one of the arguments of getting an MP in government was well, now they're going to have more of a voice, so we're going to expect more. Are you feeling a bit of that pressure?
I am, definitely, but I think that that's a fair expectation for people to have, that there is more ability for a member of parliament from the government party to try to get things done for the community than an opposition member who just doesn't have that power, just doesn't have those levers available. Right. So it doesn't mean that we can necessarily get everything done that we might want to, or that there's no negotiation that has to happen, but I don't think it's unreasonable for Victorians to hope for more federal support for our local priorities now that they've got a voice in government.
Yeah.
First time in a generation, as we like to say. So let's see what we can do, you know?
No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure, no pressure. I did, like I said, I did put up my hand. I did ask for this.
Yeah. Whenever I talk about politics, I'm like, oh, well, that person's, you know, for the NDP. No, that's not for the NDP. That person's for the BC NDP. Oh, that's for the Liberals. Oh, no, that's a totally different party. That's not BC. And then, like, city council, there's like, you don't have that at all. Like, you have totally different, you know.
Yeah, I'm lucky that I don't have a partisan association. Local government in Victoria, there's no political parties, so I'm completely independent. I have no one telling me what to do, what to say. I have no staff, which would be nice. But it's also nice not to have that pressure of, here's the party position, and you got to support it no matter what. So there's kind of pros and cons to both.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think it's true that one of the really interesting things about BC politics is a long-standing brand confusion between provincial and federal parties. So for a long time, there was both a federal and provincial NDP, Liberal and Conservative party in BC. And for a lot of people who are not paying close attention to politics between elections, it can be confusing about who they're actually voting for at any given election. In this most recent federal election, it was the first time when there wasn't actually, well, first time in a long time anyway, that there wasn't a provincial Liberal party that people might be confusing with the federal Liberal Party. But there was, of course, a federal NDP that was, in many cases, I think, being confused for the provincial NDP. And a lot of people who have concerns or are not satisfied with some of the way that politics is playing out at the provincial level in BC held the federal NDP accountable for that and punished them by withholding their votes in this campaign.
Yeah. And the provincial NDP is a little bit more centrist than the federal NDP. So I think a lot of provincial NDP folks might have voted for the federal Liberal because there's a lot of overlap there. So it gets pretty nuanced.
Yeah, that's something very different than what you have in the States, right? Because in the States, you just have, you know, here's the Democrats and here's the Republicans. And here you have, like, the same name of a party, but they're not the same party. Like, whose idea was that?
It's a reality. I mean, I think having a multi-party system is one of the great strengths of the Canadian system, actually, compared to the US. I am not someone who would want us to lose those other options on the ballot. It's true that in this election, we saw more Canadians than virtually ever before vote for the two largest parties, the federal Liberals and the federal Conservatives. But there was a pretty unique set of circumstances, I think, that led to that in this campaign. And I think there's lots of room in the future for the other smaller parties to, you know, reestablish themselves in the mind of voters and rebuild their brands a little bit and have some new leaders in the hot seat by the time the next election rolls around. And, you know, we'll see how things go.
Yeah. For this one, I think we're going to go for a little stroll, if that's good for you. Are you getting an inkling of why I brought you here yet, Will?
Is it the ferry terminal?
It is not the ferry terminal.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so you have absolutely no clue. I love that.
Is it Haven Spa, which is also a personal favorite?
Something I did not know, but no, I've brought you here because Rachel tells me.
Oh, my nemesis.
Yes. Rachel tells me that that your favorite part about being a federal politician is all of the travel you get to do now.
Oh, yes.
And I hear you especially love taking float planes to the airport.
So I need to be really clear about this. I think Harbour Air is a great business and a great resource, and we support Harbour Air. I personally have a less than stellar track record in terms of keeping my breakfast down on their flights, but I don't want this to become an anti-Harbour Air PSA. That's not okay.
Will Greaves on record says
no. We love Harbour Air. I just sometimes find the ferry to be an easier go.
Right.
You got sick on the plane?
Real sick.
Oh no. How about Helijet? Can you do that?
So you know what? I haven't taken the Helijet yet, but I have colleagues who rave about it, so I'm sure I'll get up there eventually. Yeah.
So all of this travel, that's actually kind of the biggest shift in your life.
That's right. That's exactly right. So yeah, it's a long commute, and you know, the joke I make with my provincial counterpart, so there's the provincial member of the Legislative Assembly for Victoria. She's got one of the best jobs in politics because her commute is like 1.5 kilometers down to the ledge downtown. But the federal member for Victoria has one of the worst jobs in federal politics because our commute's around 4,500 kilometers to Ottawa. So it's a long way to go.
How much of your time are you actually spending so far away from your family and from the city where you ostensibly live in?
It varies a little bit. So right now in the summer, the House of Commons isn't actually sitting. So right now I'm in Victoria almost all the time, and that's great. It's been a really welcome shift. When the House is sitting, there's a lot of back and forth. So Parliament has introduced what they call the hybrid parliament, which is essentially Zoom calling, remote calling that we can use for a lot of our work that takes some of the pressure off to be there in person. But certain things you have to be there. The federal government's in Ottawa, relationships are in Ottawa, the ability to effectively advocate for some of those local priorities, really requires a physical presence there. So it's back and forth every week when Parliament is sitting.
And how much have you been doing that already? You're very new at this, so I don't know if you had much sitting in Ottawa yet.
Very new, but June we had the spring sitting of Ottawa after the election was done, and it was a very rapid sitting. So it was one of the fastest returns of Parliament after a federal election in Canadian history. And so we sat for 5 weeks in June, and we passed some major new legislation, some big laws. Had kind of our crash course orientation as new MPs. So that was a really intense month, and then we crashed into the summer and get a bit of a breather. Lots of work to do locally, but we'll be back in the saddle, and the House will be sitting again starting in the middle of September.
There's the Parliament in Ottawa, so I get that. You're sitting in Ottawa, but you don't necessarily spend that much time working in the Parliament here, per se. So
yeah.
Where do you actually do most of your work?
So I don't work from the Parliament here, except occasionally I get invited for a meeting or something, but the Ledge is not my workplace. We have a community office. So every member of Parliament across Canada has at least one office in their constituency. Some of the big rural ridings have more than one. And for me and my team, we aren't taking over the old MP's office. And so one of the big tasks that we've had on our plate is finding a new office here, negotiating a lease, getting it set up, getting moved over from the old office. We're in the middle of that as we speak.
Yeah, in fact, I know that because I wanted to meet you at your office, and Rachel was like, there is no office.
The whole city is our office.
Yes, I always say that as a pedicab driver.
Yeah.
The whole city is my office.
Yeah.
Matt, do you happen to do much traveling?
No, one of the nice things about the local level is the only traveling I do is basically from my house on the bike lane to City Hall. And I hate to say it, but I'm kind of past the traveling phase. I like being at home. My kids are 8 and 12, so I like being at home every night. And I think it just shows how much of a difficult job Will is doing. It's a hard job that I think people don't understand how challenging just a personal toll is. So we'll see how his hair is looking, and we'll do the same episode in a couple of years, see if there's any grays in there.
Oh.
You're looking pretty good right now.
Yeah, they're coming in though. Let me tell you, my kid is actively monitoring. So the
Every
grays,
flight.
yeah,
That
every
happens.
flight, every flight, a few more.
Everybody goes a bit gray.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. All right, well, we're going to head to a place that represents all the provinces and territories of Canada.
You're biking us to Ottawa?
Yeah, you have 2 months, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
As long as I don't have to pedal, I'll go.
Matt, I know you work for the province right now, but just so that we have said it at some point, what exactly is it that you do for the province?
Yeah, so I do legislation development, and so that's what I did at the Ministry of Finance. I worked on tax legislation, and now I work on legislation in the social sector, particularly for post-secondary sector. And so a lot of my time is actually spent in the provincial legislature, because once politicians and civil servants prepare a piece of legislation, it has to go to the legislature for formal public debate and to be voted on by the MLAs. So this definitely is kind of my part of the city right now is there. My office is just down the road in the Heritage St. Anne's building, but I spend a lot of time here as well.
Wait,
So,
you're at St. Anne's Academy?
yeah, that's where I generally work. Yeah,
That's a beautiful building. I had no. Okay.
I'm on lunch break from there now.
You're just full of surprises. Were you still in punk bands when you started working for the Ministry of Finance? Was there any crossover between the two faces that you've worn?
Yeah, I've played in bands my whole time, and I was a very active musician when I was at the Ministry of Finance. So I kind of like those two worlds personally. I like playing music, but I also like understanding how the world works. I think a lot of maybe one of the sad parts about politics a little bit is you kind of lose out on who your actual representative is and what they like to do in their personal life. Like I'm sure Will has some crazy interests that we might not be seeing in this kind of formal side of you, but it's neat to see the people behind the politics, I think.
Well, I've heard that you're a baker. I've heard that you're a really good baker.
I'm flattered. Thank you.
Put
I
on your
try.
apron
I
and
do.
make some muffins and sourdough.
I'm the chef in the household, so I do most of our household cooking, and I really enjoy that, and I find it a really good de-stressor from the political side of things. You're using a totally different side of your brain.
Yeah.
And then the reward, of course, is good eating, which is one of my favorite things at all times, really.
Yeah. You must have loved the pandemic then.
So it's actually funny, it's directly related to the pandemic. I mean, I was an okay cook before the pandemic, but in the midst of all of that stress and anxiety in 2020, I kind of made the resolution that, well, this might be the way we're living right now. At least I can ensure that my family's going to eat well.
That's my de-stressing mechanism, is in the kitchen, cleaning up, making a meal. Like, I find it really calming. So I feel bad for people who that's the worst part of their day, is actually having to cook for something.
Absolutely. In that sense, I will say that cooking most of your meals at home during the pandemic, Friday night takeout was also like a real cornerstone in our household.
Yeah.
And that was the way that we were
True.
supporting local business, taking a little bit of a break, getting somebody else to do the cooking one night of the week, and getting a kind of wider variety of cuisine than we might prepare for ourselves. But the other 6 days of the week, it's pretty much me.
Yeah.
So, behold, the Confederation Garden Park with all of the flags of the different provinces, including British Columbia, where we are right now. And we're right next to the legislature. So I thought this would be a nice place symbolically to go, although not that much Indigenous representation, I have to say. We got Nunavut over there, but you know.
Well, we were talking about the Crown before and the Constitution, and that's one of the central tensions that we have in this country right now is under our constitutional system, we've got the federal and provincial orders of government, but then the Constitution recognizes and reaffirms Indigenous peoples' inherent and treaty rights and creates new constitutional rights, which kind of creates Indigenous peoples as a third order of government de facto, but not in the formal kind of way that we've actually designed the Canadian Confederation, so that you really can't govern very effectively in Canada without having Indigenous peoples and governments around the table participating. But when you come to a place like this, they're not represented because they don't have that kind of formal incorporation in the same way. So I think it shows the kind of messiness and the ongoing evolution of the Canadian political system at work.
Absolutely. When I started doing this show, it was because I noticed that depending on which community you belong to, you would have a totally different experience of Victoria. But I never would have guessed to what extent that would also apply depending on which branch of government that you're in, that each of these is also kind of their own community.
I think it's one of the hard things in our job is everybody has a completely different experience of a city. Some people experience this city going to music festivals, going to bars and restaurants, having a great time. Others experience it in a way where they're desperately looking for housing or they're terrified when they walk down the street. And it's hard to represent the diverse interests of this community. I find that at the local level, there's so many different views on the city. How do you represent those? And maybe I tend to look for themes of most people are struggling with housing affordability.
That's right.
A lot of people want to deal with climate, but other than that, it's really hard to balance the different needs, and especially for you when you have all those kind of needs from like national security issues all the way down to housing affordability. Like, it's hard.
Oh yeah, you don't come into this role already knowing everything that you need to know in order to be able to do the role, right? So it's a ton of learning on the job. And pretty much every time somebody reaches out to our office with a new issue, I have to learn something about that issue.
Yeah, I also can feel like maybe when you're sitting down with people who definitely would approach these things in a different way, like what you have to be focusing on, what has to be in your mind is kind of the universal thing that everybody wants. Because ultimately, we mostly all do want the same things, even if we have different ways to approach it.
We're all in a bubble in a way. Like we talked about bike lanes, how important they are, but then I'll hear from a delivery driver who's like, I hate every day in the city because I can't drive anywhere. And that's a valid perspective, is we need stuff delivered. So you go, oh yeah, I'm not a delivery driver. How do we balance that? And then someone will be in a wheelchair and we need more accessibility everywhere. And you go, oh my, we're trying to balance all of these things. And I think that's where good political leaders are ones that maybe don't have so many of their own ideas. They can really step back and listen and go, how do we try to do the best job for everybody? But it's hard.
And that may be true, but I think you're the kind of leader who does actually have his own ideas and wants them to be at the table. I know I have my own ideas and I want them to be at the table. So there is something to be said there about balancing our role in terms of representing what our constituents want and what their priorities are, while also actually showing leadership and bringing our own ideas to the table and saying, no, this is what I stand for. This is what you voted for. You can make a decision next time round whether or not you're still, still supporting that. But like, I'm not actually just going to take on board what everybody wants me to maybe say or do, because that, on the one hand, is pretty unworkable, and on the other hand, may not be true to why I got involved in politics in the first place. I think this is one of the things, too, Matt, that you and I have in common is, not to put words in your mouth, but I think we're both people who like coming downtown, and we want downtown to just get even better. But we see, and with our kids and our families, we see all kinds of reason to come downtown and to enjoy the urban environment.
Yeah.
Whereas we also, I think, both deal with some constituents who feel like they don't want to come downtown or they don't feel safe coming downtown. And we get these really different narratives being presented to us about what downtown is all about.
Yeah.
And I find that a little bit challenging to navigate because it's so far removed from my own experience.
Oh, totally. Well, some people won't come downtown because there's no parking. I will come downtown if there's better bike lanes. I want to bike downtown with my kids. And I want to get ice cream and bike around, and that's a fun time for us. So right now, the bike advocates are winning because, you know, there's more of us. It's great for your health. It's great for livability. And it's been a big win in Victoria. But yeah, I love downtown. I have a colleague on council who's afraid to walk through downtown, and that's what she thinks everyone's perspective is. And it brings a very different view to the city.
Yeah, for sure. But she is speaking on behalf of a group of people in the community, right,
Yeah.
who share that view. So we got to try to, I think, show people what they're missing when they're too afraid to come downtown. You know, this is the goodness right here.
I think one of the nice things that needs to happen more is we just, local leaders from elected, provincial, and federal, just need to get together more as people, like around a barbecue, around a beer, a coffee, or around a working table, and just get to know one another, see what we agree on and where there could be some common wins, and work for residents in that way. So this is a great show to actually just get us together to hang out.
You're contributing to good government as we speak. Yeah.
While doing donuts. Saving the world one donut at a time.